resist the pigs. This is standing with Palestinian resistance.
I had bruises on my ribs, and I got it easy.
But there were no injuries or violent clashes.
Nothing about what I saw was peaceful from the cops.
Boy, the Columbia movement looks an awful lot like what we did.
In April, Columbia University students ignited a global protest against Israel's war on Gaza, continuing the school's 7-decade legacy of social movements. Now, campus is quiet, but one key question remains: who is really behind the protests? On April 17th, hundreds of students pitched tents on the South Lawn, vowing to occupy the space until the university met their demands.
We are protesting the university's involvement in the genocide taking place in Gaza.
We want Jewish people, Palestinian people, Muslim people to live under an equal society.
We're calling for divestment, we're calling for a public statement, we're calling for an acknowledgement of the genocide.
Israel has repeatedly denied accusations of genocide, saying that its war on Gaza is in self-defense. The next day, the university authorized the police to clear out protesters. They arrested more than 100 people. Some students were suspended and kicked out of campus housing, but students continued to protest.
So this has always been a rule. They have flags there that are always either green or red. And green means you're allowed on the lawn, and red means you're not allowed on the lawn. And during the whole time of the encampment, the flag outside of that lawn was green. They were allowed. My name is Claudia Gahn. I'm a student at Columbia Journalism School, and I reported on the encampment since the beginning, really.
As a student there since 2018, Claudia had better access to information than journalists with no ties to the university who could only visit the encampment and speak with students from 2 to 4 p.m. On April 29th, Columbia President Minouche Shafik said the university would not divest from Israel and urged students to voluntarily clear the encampment. Instead, protesters seized an academic building, Hamilton Hall. That lack of access was most evident the next night when the university called the police again. Claudia shot the footage you're seeing.
I went to Hamilton Hall, and there were people who were starting to assemble, mostly the students that I would eventually get arrested with. There were those who said, you know, we want to advocate for this cause, but we don't want to risk any kind of disciplinary action or risk anything like arrest. So that was completely fine and understandable, but there were those of us who, given our position with the university, given our privilege as American citizens, were willing to take higher risk. And so I joined that group of students.
At about 9 o'clock is when I started hearing people shouting shame from outside of campus. And that's when I knew that the NYPD was coming.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
Before they even approached us, they approached journalists, legal observers, and medical professionals, and they kicked everyone out and threatened them with arrest.
Go! 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 Get going, get going, get back, get back, get back!
At the risk of sounding biased, I did not see cops acting peacefully whatsoever. They were very aggressive.
Get back! Shame on you! Get back!
They were yelling at me as a journalist. They were yelling at journalists. They were yelling at students. They were shoving students. They were shoving journalists. They were very aggressive.
And that was the first time in this whole experience that I started to feel afraid. Because I knew that those people who were there for our protection were being kicked out on purpose, presumably because the police knew the violence that they were about to exert on us.
From the sea to the river! Palestine will live forever!
And then they approached us and didn't even have a conversation. It wasn't like they said, back down or you'll be arrested. It wasn't like they read us our rights or anything. We were not resisting. We were, there to create a spectacle, because that's what protest is. It's intentionally disruptive, and so we were being intentionally disruptive.
And then all of a sudden I heard some yelling, turned and saw kids on the ground, like face first on the ground.
I got hit in the side of my head with an object, probably a shield or a baton, to a point where I kind of blinked and tried to right myself up because it was like I was seeing stars, and then it was just kind of chaos.
Once the students were out of the way, the cops entered Hamilton.
It's hard to say exactly what went down inside of Hamilton Hall that night. Few journalists were present, and those arrested have been hesitant to speak out of fear of retaliation. Here's what we do know. 46 people were arrested inside Hamilton Hall and charged with trespassing. 2 days after the raid, we found out that an officer fired a gun inside Hamilton as police cleared out protesters. A spokesperson said no students were in the immediate vicinity at the time and that no one was harmed. A police accountability unit is still reviewing the incident. The NYPD told us the allegations that protesters got injured are false and that the actions of officers are recorded through the use of body-worn cameras and are subject to review. They haven't yet responded to our request to see that footage, and they didn't provide additional information. And then the aftermath.
We should have been a peaceful protest. It has basically been co-opted by professional outside agitators.
This claim that outside agitators were behind the protests came up again and again. University officials say that 30% of those arrested at Hamilton Hall were not students. But protesters say it's misleading to say that they were driving the protest.
Where have we seen this before in history?
Always. Every movement, like the civil rights movement, if it wasn't for the outside agitators, black people in the South would accept segregation. Communists are manipulating the Vietnam War protests. The older communists are sneaking in. So this is something that happens over and over again.
Why?
Because you don't want to admit that what you've done has hurt some people around you so much that they're rising up. It's easier to say they're being manipulated than look in the mirror and admitting, I fucked up.
Dr. Nason was involved in Columbia's historic 1968 student protests, which inspired the recent Hamilton Hall takeover. That spring, events like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination heightened tensions between students and the administration. Protesters demanded the university end its ties to the Vietnam War and squash plans to build a segregated gym. Students seized Hamilton Hall and other campus buildings for several days until the university called the police on them on April 30th, 1968, 56 years ago to the date of this year's occupation of Hamilton. It took Columbia years to mend trust between the administration and the student body. But a year later, the university finally agreed to abandon the gym's construction. It also cut ties with the Pentagon Institute doing research for the Vietnam War and agreed to give amnesty to demonstrators. The protests inspired student demonstrations across the country for generations to come.
4 years ago, we had the largest mass movement in modern American history after the murder of George Floyd. And high school students played a central role in those protests. These are the students in college now as these Gaza Solidarity Encampments are being created.
My generation and those generations younger have grown up with trauma after trauma after trauma collectively. 9/11 happened when I was in high school. I got to see the first Black president and then the racial aftermath of that first Black president. I graduated from grad school during a global pandemic. We have experienced so many traumatic things that, in my view, have prepared us for this moment.
So when you're talking about outside agitators, these students don't need to be instructed by some, Svengali figures in the background teaching them how to communicate. how to organize a march. They've already done that.
There are no outside agitators. We are one movement. Anybody who is involved in our movement is involved in it because they want to see this war end.
Right there was also where the sign that said Hinds Hall was. So they named it after a young girl who was killed by the Israeli military in Gaza. I think that for a lot of people, the very alluring part of the Columbia student body is their willingness to stand up for what they believe in. And I think that calling the cops on them showed them that the Shafik made the campus so that they weren't able to do that, even if that was part of a reason why they came here, even if that was just them learning and growing and deciding to stand up for what they believe in.
I've had a lot of questions. Are you ashamed to be at Columbia? Are you embarrassed by your administration? I'm embarrassed by the administration, but I'm not ashamed to be a Columbia student. I'm actually incredibly proud to be a Columbia student because Columbia is not the administration. They're the people who are willing to lay down their lives and sacrifice their careers and in some cases their degrees to end a genocide that is slaughtering people, to end a genocide that has killed almost 15,000 children to date. You know, that's the Columbia I'm proud to be a part of, the Columbia that's going to be in history books for what we stood for that day.
This president is saying that Columbia will not divest. Are you surprised by that?
They'll divest eventually. Remember, we won the gym, but we didn't win the end to the Vietnam War. You know, they say they won't divest now. Let's see what they'll say in 2 years or 3 years.
Mayor Adams' office did not respond to our inquiries. Columbia University did not respond to our inquiries. Since April 18th, more than 3,100 people have been arrested or detained on campuses across the U.S. In response to the demonstrations, some U.S. universities are considering divesting from Israel. A few have since committed to full divestment, including Sacramento State and Evergreen State College. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office has dropped and sealed cases against 31 people arrested inside Hamilton Hall, largely due to lack of evidence.
Yeah, so this is just the beginning. When we say that we're erasing the distinction between so-called outside agitators and students, in practice that means taking this to the streets, out of the elite Ivy League clusters of privilege and into the communities where people experience oppression the most acutely. When we resist the pigs and the police in the US, this is standing with Palestinian resistance. This is an interlinking of our struggles. So we can say confidently that this is only the beginning.